welcome to the Perfectly Brewed show. I am your host Rahul Trivedi, and this podcast is all about breaking down economic, political, and social events that influence and shape our society. So, in this episode, I'm going to talk about. Wait. First, let me talk about what I'm not going to talk about in this episode because a lot of content is already circulating on internet around the farmers issue. So in this episode, I'm not going to talk about BJP versus Congress. Also, I will not going to speculate on Khalistani angle. And for this episode, I will move a little bit away from either utopian or dystopian approach because it's a matter of policy. When it comes to policy designing and implementing, I understand that cynicism is bound to arise because at present, much of the policy making in India is happening for short-term political gain rather than long-term impact on society. So at this point, it is pretty much clear to everybody that farmers, mainly from Punjab and some from Haryana, are protesting on the outskirts of the Delhi against the three controversial farm laws passed in the monsoon session of the parliament. So let's briefly talk about these three farm laws and what is exactly the bone of contention among them. And we will also look at the much less covered environmental and economic aspect of this whole conundrum. So the first bill is the Farmers Produce Trade and Commerce Promotion and Facilitation Bill 2020, which is about bypassing the APMC system. The second bill is the Farmers Empowerment and Protection Agreement on Price Assurance and Farm Services Bill 2020, and this lengthy name is about contract farming. And the third bill is the Essential Commodities Bill 2020, which is about allowing the food stocking by agribusinesses. Although the farmers are demanding to repeal all the three laws, these are not bills anymore. The majority of the dissent is centered around the first law, which is the Farmers Produce Trade and Commerce Promotion and Facilitation Act 2020. This is basically going to break the monopsony of APMC mandis by allowing farmers to sell their produce outside of the APMC government regulated APMC mandis. When there are a single seller and many buyers, it is called the monopoly. But when there are a single buyer and many sellers, it is called the monopsony. The idea is not to shut down the APMC mandis, but to open up new options for farmers to sell their produce outside of the APMC mandis, if at all they get the better prices from them. That sounds great for farmers as well as buyers because in absence of APMC mandis, buyer will not have to engage in the middleman and cess collected by state government and also the mandi fees. So if this is mutually beneficial, then what is exactly the problem? What is the concern of protesting farmers? And this is where the MSP comes into the picture. MSP is basically minimum price that at which government procures or buys from the farmers. The government announces MSP every year for 23 crops, including wheat and rice, but it is not legally bound to pay these prices to farmers, and that makes MSP just an indicative floor price without any backing of the law. So it is just a notional price. In India, only 6% of the farmers sell their produce at MSP. And most of these farmers are from Punjab and Haryana, and that crop is mainly wheat and rice. So farmers from Punjab and Haryana are afraid that with the private players coming in, the mandi system and MSP will collapse and they will be left at the mercy of corporate interest, and those corporations will buy their crop at lower prices than MSP. And this dystopian scenario is somewhat misplaced, and government have repeatedly assured farmers that nothing of that sort is going to happen. But still, I would say that it makes sense for farmers to protest. But what is the cost of maintaining that status quo? A prominent agriculture economist, Professor Ashok Gulati, has pointed out in one of his Indian Express articles that the economic cost of excess grain beyond the buffer stock norm was more than 1,80,000 crores all because of open-ended procurement. And so it doesn't make sense for center to lock down capital, which by the way has alternative uses, this way. In April this year, the Punjab government constituted an expert panel headed by Montek Singh Ahluwalia on economy to aid medium and long-term revival strategy for the Punjab state post the COVID-19. Among other things, large chunk of report was focused on Punjab's agriculture. According to the panel, the total power subsidy, meaning electricity, for agriculture has put an unsustainable burden on state's budget. And this regime is highly regressive and has had the damaging effects on environment because it promotes water guzzling paddy cultivation. Paddy is rice basically. Can you imagine that 1 kilogram of rice cultivation requires 3,000 to 5,000 liters of water? Another suggestion on crop diversification was made. The idea was to double the area under high value crop like high value fruits like plum, lychee, guava and vegetables like potatoes, peas, chilies, etc. It was recommended by various committees before as well, because you see, this is not 1965 when we were relied on US for foods and we were actually running in the deficit of food. But right now, situation is vastly different and we are running in a massive surplus. So why the crop diversification is not happening? Well, the thing is that there is not enough political will to implement what we can call radical reforms in agriculture, and wheat paddy cycle is deeply entrenched in MSP, which is in turn creating low-level equilibrium trap for farmers. Most of the committee's recommendations were shrugged off by the state government, who appointed that same committee, by the way, because they were not politically feasible. I think this is the point where politics prevails over policy and breeds skepticism that narrow political interests is way more important than broader public interests. I couldn't agree more when Professor S.S. Gill, an economist and professor at Punjab University, said that whoever removes power will be removed from power, and he made this particular statement for Punjab. I talk about not clinging to extreme scenario because you see, there is no MSP for dairy produce in India. There is no MSP for poultry, and those sectors are thriving because of its market-driven approach. And it's not that they don't have private players in them. You can take the example of Hudson, Amul, and Nestle that are buying milk on daily basis from lakhs of farmers, and there is no MSP for that. So deregulation is not entirely new concept, and a lot of Indians are, I'm sure, familiar with that. And it can actually be helpful in strengthening the agriculture sector without hurting the farmers' income and without hurting the environment as well. So according to my research on this topic, farmers' concern is genuine but greatly exaggerated. And it is irrelevant at this point by whom. The thing is, these laws are nowhere perfect, and they alone are not going to change the sluggish Indian agriculture altogether. These laws miss out on so many important aspects that I have to make another episode just to explain the complexity with Indian agriculture system and the recommendations of Swaminathan committee and various committees before. But one thing I can say for sure is that these reforms, these bills, can be considered a step in the right direction, and this is my take on this whole episode of Farmers Protest. So this was it for today. I hope I was able to bring some value to you. I will keep bringing fresh perspective on the table. If you like what I make, please consider subscribing to my channel and share if you feel that somebody might gain from this. Bye bye.